The silence of the swarm. The galaxy is not a place of individual stars, but of territories, jagged lines drawn in the vacuum by those powerful enough to hold them. For eons, the most feared of these lines belonged to the Skrull. To look at a Skrull was to look at the perfection of biological warfare. They were a hive mind species, a collective of billions acting as a single, lethal organism. They didn't build cities, they grew them. Their spires were made of reinforced chitin and calcified bone, reaching miles into the atmospheres of conquered worlds. They didn't have a culture, they had a hunger. When the Skrull first encountered the United Terran Coalition on the fringes of the Orion Arm, they didn't see a peer. They didn't even see an enemy. They saw soft matter. I was the primary chronicler for the Galactic Aegis, an observer assigned to monitor the first contact. I remember the first report the Skrull Hive Queen transmitted to the Neutral Council. It was chilling in its simplicity. The bipedal organisms are biologically inefficient. The translation read, "They lack natural armor. Their bones break under negligible pressure. Their communication is slow, tethered to vibrating air. They are fragile. They are harvest." The Skrull moved with a terrifying confidence. They bypassed our diplomatic beacons. They ignored our treaties. To them, a human was nothing more than a momentary obstacle, a thin shell protecting a wealth of resources. They believed that because we were soft, we were weak. They believed that because we valued life, we were afraid of death. They were about to learn that fragility is not the same as weakness. Bart Roman 2. The descent onto Krios Prime. The invasion of Krios Prime began not with a declaration of war, but with a shadow. Krios was a jewel of human engineering, a terraformed world of rolling grasslands and the sprawling city of New Ethelgard. It was a place of art, science, and families. When the Skrull drop spires pierced the clouds, the humans didn't stand a chance, or so the Hive thought. The Skrull descended in their millions, a living tide of claws and acid-spitting biocannons. They moved through the outskirts of the city like a scythe through wheat. I watched the feeds from the orbital relays. It was a massacre. The human security forces, equipped with standard kinetic rifles, were overwhelmed by the sheer mass of the swarm. The Skrull didn't use tactics. They used numbers. For every Skrull warrior that fell, 10 more crawled over the corpse of their sibling to reach the human lines. The Hive Queen's arrogance was absolute. She didn't even bother to deploy her heavy siege organisms. She sent in the harvesters, thin, spindly creatures designed to gather organic matter. She thought the war was already over. She thought New Ethelgard was a larder, not a fortress. In the heart of the city, at the steps of the Great Library, stood a single battalion of the 101st Terran Rangers. They were led by a woman named Colonel Sarah Vance. She was, by all Skrull metrics, fragile. She was 5'8", made of meat and bone, and lacked any natural weaponry. But Sarah Vance had something the Hive could never understand. She had a memory of what happened to those who touched her home. Bart Roman 3. The human response. Hold the line. Vance's voice crackled over the open comms. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a plea. It was a command that seemed to anchor the very air around her. The Skrull surged forward, a wall of clicking mandibles and black eyes. They were less than 50 meters away when the humans finally stopped firing their rifles. The Skrull paused for a microsecond, the collective mind interpreting this as a sign of surrender. They were wrong. The humans hadn't stopped out of fear. They had stopped because the rifles were no longer the primary weapon. Now, Vance whispered, beneath the streets of New Ethelgard, the very foundations of the city began to hum. The Skrull felt it through their sensitive tarsal claws, a vibration that spoke of immense, harnessed power. You see, the Hive built their cities to grow. Humans build their cities to work. New Ethelgard wasn't just a place to live. It was a feat of geothermal engineering. The humans had tapped into the core of the planet, not just for power, but for defense. Suddenly, the soft humans weren't running. They were retreating into reinforced bunkers with the synchronized precision of a clockwork machine. And as the last human disappeared beneath the surface, the city itself began to scream. Bart Roman 4. The leveling the Skrull Hive Queen watched from her throne ship as the human city her prize began to vent. High-pressure plasma, diverted from the geothermal taps, erupted from the sewage grates and ventilation shafts. The fragile humans had turned their entire infrastructure into a weapon. The harvesters were incinerated in seconds. The warrior castes, with their invincible chitin, melted into puddles of black goo. But that was only the beginning. Colonel Vance didn't just want to stop the invasion. She wanted to send a message to the stars. Level it, she ordered. The humans had rigged the entire city with seismic charges. They didn't care about the buildings. They didn't care about the gold or the glass. They cared about the people, and the people were safe underground. In a series of rhythmic, deafening roars, the skyscrapers of New Ethelgard, the pride of the sector, collapsed inward. But they didn't just fall. They were directed. The massive structures fell outward in a starburst pattern, crushing the Skrull siege lines, burying the Hive's breeding pits under millions of tons of reinforced concrete and steel. The Hive Queen shrieked. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated shock. She had lost 500,000 units in a single heartbeat. She had never seen a species destroy its own creation just to deny an enemy of victory. The Skrull thought humans were fragile because we lived in houses of glass. They didn't realize we were willing to break the glass to cut the throat of the intruder. Part V. The shift in perspective. When the dust settled, the city was gone. In its place was a jagged crater of debris and fire, and from that crater the humans emerged. They didn't look fragile anymore. They were covered in soot and blood, their eyes burning with a cold, terrifying light. They didn't wait for the Skrull to reform. They charged. The Skrull, for the first time in their billion-year history, felt a collective shiver of doubt. The hive mind, usually a sea of absolute certainty, was clouded by a new signal: fear. They watched as a human soldier, his armor shattered, his fragile arm broken, used his remaining strength to jam a grenade into the maw of a Skrull great beast. They watched as human mothers stood over their children with kitchen knives, facing down Bia constructs 10 times their size. The Hive Queen realized too late that she hadn't attacked a weak species. She had attacked a species that defined itself by its ability to endure the impossible. Part VI. Resolution. The Skrull fleet withdrew from Creo's Prime that night. They left behind a graveyard of their finest warriors and a message etched into the very crust of the planet by the fires of the human resistance. I visited the site of New Ethelgard months later. The humans were already rebuilding. They weren't mourning the city. They were laughing as they laid the new foundations, stronger than the last. I spoke to Colonel Vance. I asked her how she could bear to destroy something so beautiful. She looked at the horizon, where the new spires were already rising. The city wasn't the buildings, she said, her voice soft but unbreakable. The city was the people. The buildings were just a coat, and we're not afraid to take our coat off if it gets in the way of a fight. The galaxy watched the footage of Creo's Prime. They saw the hive, the unstoppable, arrogant hive, stumble back in terror from a species they had mocked. They saw the ruins of a city turned into the tomb of an empire. And for the first time, the galaxy understood what it truly meant to be human. If this story moved you, subscribe for more human stories from the stars.